Hey, this is April, and this show, Set discusses psychedelics. It's intended for audiences 21 and over. Also, I am not a medical expert. If you are looking to engage with psychedelic substances, please consult your physician before doing so. Hi. Welcome back. I'm your host, April Pride. So much has happened since the last episode. Psychedelic Salon at Town Hall Seattle returned. We had 3 guests, Abby Rosner, an author, Scott Wright, a filmmaker, and Dr. Emily Winkin. We had 275 people live in person at Town Hall, 250 people live streaming, and so much feedback on this being our best salon yet. I love all of them, but perhaps it was special. Psychedelics and seniors, as I said in the last episode, I probably would call it psychedelics and aging because it really speaks to how are you spending the last half of your life, right? Arguably, I'm in the last half of my life and I'm not yet a senior. I will have the recording, the audio, and the video here on the podcast in the next couple of weeks, so stay tuned for that. And our upcoming salon is on March 5th, Psychedelics and Substance Use, with Dr. Nathan Sackett with the University of Washington Center for Novel Therapeutics. Certainly worth catching either live or live streamed. If you're in Seattle, come say hello, ask questions. I'd love to meet you. The second thing that has happened since 1 week ago is the first gathering of women in the wild here in Seattle. There were 10 women. We met for 3 hours. Most people took 3 microdose capsules. They are dosed at 0.15 grams each. We talked about our relationships to fear, faith, and freedom. A good time was certainly had by all. The feedback has been extraordinary, and I will continue to host these gatherings in Seattle every other week. I'll include a link in the show notes so you can learn more. Hopefully, if you're either in Seattle or planning to visit, you can join us. The next one is February 21st, March 14th, and March 28th. On April 4th, we will have a special Women in the Wild featuring a researcher and doctor. Her work is centered on disordered eating. She will be a psychedelic salon guest. And if there's anyone in the audience, like myself, who has suffered from an eating disorder at some point in your life, or you have a daughter or a loved one who is currently suffering or has in the past, I encourage you to join us and take part in this important conversation. What we're doing in today's episode, I'm reading each week of the 12-week protocol from Micropsych, which is Set's 12-week microdosing guide that you can find on our website. I'll link to it in the show notes. Let's dive in to Microdosing for Midlife, week 2. This week, I found myself asking my ADHD doc, if I don't have the typical symptoms of menopause, am I at greater risk for cognitive decline because I'm not taking HRT? More directly, I asked my doctor, am I giving myself dementia because I've been spared hot flashes? Her answer, not likely, but get a second opinion from someone who's deep in the current research. I promise I'll do that and report. I'm reporting back. Here's what the evidence actually says in plain language. I am not automatically protecting my brain based on my HRT protocol. The story is much more nuanced than that, linked with worse cognitive outcomes later, a high overall symptom burden. In several large recent studies, women who reported more menopausal symptoms across the board, not just hot flashes, but sleep disruption, mood changes, physical complaints, were more likely to show cognitive changes later in life. Each additional symptom mattered. Being relatively spared, having fewer or milder symptoms is not a red flag. High symptom load seems to be the signal researchers are paying attention to. Now about hormone therapy. When you zoom out and look at randomized trials, the results are actually pretty consistent. Starting standard dose menopausal hormone therapy around the time of menopause appears to be cognitively neutral in the long run. No major protection, no major harm, even when women are followed by a decade or more. Where risk does show up is when hormone therapy is started much later, after age 65, and especially with certain older formulations. That's where studies have seen increased dementia risk. Not taking HRT does not equal choosing cognitive decline, and taking it is not a guaranteed brain protection strategy. This is part of why the story has felt so confusing for so long. Earlier observational studies suggested estrogen users had lower Alzheimer's risk, which led to what's called the timing hypothesis, the idea that hormones might help if started earlier, near menopause, and hurt if started much later. Newer analysis soften that picture. Timing, formulation, vascular health, genetics, all of it matters. For healthy women starting near menopause, hormone therapy looks mostly neutral for long-term cognition. That doesn't mean estrogen doesn't matter to the brain. It does. Menopause itself is a neurological transition. Estrogen loss affects vascular health, inflammation, and stress systems in the brain. Women do have a higher lifetime risk of dementia than men. But this isn't about one symptom, like hot flashes, deciding your fate. Hot flashes and other vasomotor symptoms are correlated with some brain changes in imaging studies. But again, it's the overall burden, not the absence of symptoms, that seems to matter most. So if the deeper question underneath all of this is, what can I actually do now so I'm not looking back in 20 years feeling like I missed my window? The most evidence-backed answers are honestly less glamorous, but far more powerful than any single intervention. Cardiometabolic health matters. Blood pressure, blood sugar, cholesterol, movement, sleep and mood matter. Chronic insomnia, depression, and anxiety in midlife are real risk factors, and treating them is brain protective. Cognitive and social engagement matter. Learning, challenge, connection. This is how cognitive reserve is built. Do you know what I mean by challenge? Learning a new game, a new instrument, a new language. Do you know what I mean by connection? Getting out of your house and talking to people IRL, or inviting them over for tea. Hormone therapy can be a legitimate tool for women who need it. It just shouldn't be sold as a magic shield for dementia. If you've been spared hot flashes, you're not broken. If you're not on HRT, you're not failing some sort of invisible test. If you're paying attention, asking these questions, caring for your nervous system, tending to your health, that already counts. I wanted to add this context because fear thrives in uncertainty, and this is one of those places where women have been left with way too much of it. Okay, let's get back to the piece. Okay, let's get back to my post. The brain's secret ally, estrogen as a neuroprotectant. The information that now floods my feeds includes what's really going on in our midlife brains. And my question was born out of this recently acquired knowledge. It turns out that estrogen doesn't just regulate periods. It's a natural neuroprotectant that helps protect the brain and nervous system from damage. Think of it like armor for your neurons. Neuroprotectants work to prevent or slow down cell death in the brain, reduce inflammation in brain tissue, support the brain's ability to repair itself, protect against toxic processes like oxidative stress that can lead to diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, or even depression. Especially for women, estrogen supports memory, mood, and overall brain health by keeping key chemical messengers like serotonin and dopamine in balance. When estrogen declines at midlife, we lose some of that protection, which is why some researchers believe it plays a role in the increased risk of cognitive decline or mood disorders during perimenopause and menopause. Other examples of neuroprotectants include omega-3 fatty acids, certain antioxidants, and psychedelics like psilocybin and ketamine. And if you want to learn more about the impact of psychedelics on the brain, check out episode 55 of this podcast, which specifically is looking at ketamine and its impact on the brain, but we talk about psychedelics in general in that episode. What happens to the brain when estrogen declines in midlife? When estrogen diminishes, it sets off a cascade in the brain. Serotonin dips, cortisol spikes, dopamine dysregulates, and the default mode network, that inner critic factory responsible for rumination, takes the mic and doesn't want to give it back. Here's where the science gets interesting. Our brains are wired in early life to optimize for survival. What helps us stay connected and safe in our family or culture, that wiring becomes automatic. Compulsive thoughts, overreactions, self-sabotage, they're often just old patterns on repeat. This is the default mode network doing its job. Fear-based. Your brain's negativity bias, honed over decades, decides what memories and meetings are worth keeping. Unfortunately, it over-indexes on pain. So while I may not have many of the physical symptoms we associate with perimenopause, my daydreaming has been more frequent, less dreamy, and more likely to get stuck on terrifying outcomes. Psychedelics and neuroplasticity, softening old survival patterns. Psychedelics like psilocybin can help loosen the grip of that rigidity. They soften those survival scripts, open space for new neural connections, and even bring buried emotional memories into view. Someone turned on the lights in a room you didn't realize you were sitting in. The brain becomes more lateral, creative, connected. Emotional reactivity slows. You access what some researchers call the observer mind. You don't just react, you notice, then choose. In psychedelics, we call it cultivating the witness. That's your observer mind. This week, I needed that space to cultivate my witness, to have an observer's mind. My ex-husband and I watched our eldest graduate from high school. I hosted my family. My mom and dad stayed in my house together. They are divorced for 40 years. They stayed with me for 10 days. I navigated job leads, both promising and deflating, psychedelic science conference 2025 in Denver. Instead, I hosted a pre-MAPS fundraiser at my home for the Board of Psychedelic Medicine and Therapies. Looking around the room, I had one clear thought. This will prove historic. Washington State has the ingredients, researchers, advocates, benefactors to shape what ethical psychedelic medicine looks like. And the Board for Psychedelic Medicine and Therapies, they're building the first national credentialing body to help govern the psychedelic space. It's not sexy, but it is crucial. And an update on BPMT, they still have not achieved the $250,000 in funding that they need to provide this critical resource in the advancement of psychedelic medicine. A personal case study, microdosing, anxiety, and action. I'm 2 weeks into the micropsych protocol, and while my anxiety about the job search hasn't evaporated, it's transmuted. The urge to escape has become a driving force for action. The weekend before I began, I spent 48 hours deep in existential dread over AI, the future of humanity, and what kind of work reality my son would find himself in after college. It seems I'm able to move. My mind feels more like a witness than a warning siren. And that, to me, is the subtle power of psychedelics. They don't erase your emotions. They rearrange your relationship to them. Psychedelics remind you that you're already wired for renewal. Neuroplasticity isn't just a concept. Your brain can believe in something different, and sometimes that's enough to begin. When I originally wrote this, I was on week 2 of a 12-week protocol. My mind was able to recover from doom spirals, but I hadn't mastered avoiding, quote, going there. So here are some reflection questions, and I answered them, and I'll answer them for you. Who is your inner voice? What limits your energy, clarity, or peace of mind? For me, prioritizing my to-do list over at least 6 hours of sleep. Can you identify the inner voice labeling you as, quote, too much or, quote, not enough? Whose voice is it really? For me, it depends on the day. Too much shows up in overdrive, trying to do it all the time. Not enough creeps in when I question my intelligence. But I've lived enough life to know I'm awesome. I'm open to edits, but I'm all good. What might emerge if you stopped believing this voice? Clarity, creativity, space to feel without judgment. I also think of that bumper sticker, wisdom hits hard. Don't believe everything you think. Reflection questions like these are included for each of the weekly lessons in the 12-week microdosing program, Micropsyched. Exclusive to Set Sets is featured in my 12-part Substack series. The first 6 posts, like today's, week 2, are available to all subscribers. The final 6 are available to paid subscribers who also receive the first 4 weeks of this microdosing plan and have access to a monthly integration call with other paid subscribers. You can sign up as a free or paid Substack subscriber on SetSet's website, getsetset.com. While you're there, take the quiz to receive your personalized protocol featuring clinician-approved psilocybin products, medicine guides, and integration tools. In next week's episode, we dig into emotional stabilization, libido, and what it means to feel whole again, to be integrated, to have integrity. As I mentioned earlier in the episode, if you're looking for more information on the effect of psychedelics on our brain, including how female reproductive hormones may impact our sensitivity to these compounds, listen to episode 55 of this podcast, Ketamine-Assisted Therapy, Brain Effects Explained. Thank you for being here and for listening so thoughtfully. If this episode resonated, I'd love for you to share it with one friend who's navigating midlife, asking deeper questions. And if you haven't yet, please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It's the simplest way to support this work and help it reach more people who need harm reduction education around psychedelics. You'll find links to everything we talked about in today's show notes. And if you want the full Microdosing for Midlife series, you can upgrade. Until next week, take care of yourself and those around you. I'm April, your host, and thanks again for joining me.